Chris from the Mighty Decibel here. Welcome back. So this episode, we're going to be returning to our Albums by the Decade series. And specifically, we're going to be looking at the band DIO. And I'm a little scant in my knowledge of the band, so I've invited an expert to join us to walk us through this. It's none other than the illustrious Martin Popoff, author of 2 DIO books and over 100 other metal and rock books. Welcome, Martin.
Yes, thanks, Chris. Looking forward to this. Let's do it.
All right. So let's talk about, first of all, the 2 books. So I've got your 2006 book here, The Light Beyond the Black. But then you've just issued a brand spanking new one, Dream Evil DIO in the 80s.
That would be that
there
one
it
there.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what possessed you to write 2 books on DIO? Was it a case of a love for the band, or you saw a dearth of information in the marketplace on it, or both?
Yeah. So I did 3-4 books for Metal Blade Records back a long time ago, and DIO was one of them. And we weren't, I'm writing this way long time ago, so I'm not as good as I am now. I hope I got better. But also, we didn't really have any pictures in it. So what I've done with a lot of these old books is updated and greatly expanded them. And this was kind of next on the plate for being one of the super old books, one of the first books I ever wrote. So that book that you have there is every album right up to the end. But the new one is more or less as long as the old one, but it's greatly expanded, and it's only the albums from the 80s. So a lot of new interviews since that book over the years. I think that book is a 2005, 2007,
6.
Something like
that.
6. Okay. So it's pretty old. Rewritten, greatly expanded, more analysis, more interviews, way more pictures. And the new one's got, 2 tipped in color sections of pictures. I've started doing that on all the books that I do myself as well. Essentially, I just wanted to do a deeper dive and just look at this part, and hopefully I'll do a second half. So what'll happen is, just like many of my books that I've turned into 2, like the Sabbath and the Priest, it'll be double the size and better once it's all done.
Right on. So the next one might be a 90s by itself, and then a third one on thousands, or you think you'll merge the 90s?
No, I'd merge the 2, because there's only, I think, three albums in each of those decades. So it'll be right up to the end.
Right on.
If I do it, it's going to be called Killing the Dragon, DIO in the 90s and 2000s, and put it out there. If anybody's ever taken pictures of the band from 1990 to the end, I don't have any pictures, and that's why right now I'm not even really considering doing it. I've got to get some pictures first. So if anybody's got photos taking shots of the band from 1990 moving forward at all,
I'm surprised somebody in the DIO fan club should have,
I haven't really asked in a big way yet, but I will eventually. So,
okay. So before we get into the meat of the subject, can you provide us with a quick bio overview of the band that leads us into the discussion?
Yeah. Okay. So Holy Diver comes out 83. Essentially, Ronnie and Vinny fall out with Tony and Geezer in Sabbath. They do Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules. So they start this new band. Wendy had already more or less had a solo deal going for them, and they pulled that out of their hat and said, okay, well, let's do it. Let's do this solo deal. They come out with 2 great albums right out of the gate. The Last in Line does really well as well, and DIO is now a headliner, pretty well operating machine. They move on. Sacred Heart, they have a fallout with their hotshot guitarist Vivian Campbell, who came from the Sweet Savage band, kind of a new wave of British heavy metal band that didn't really put out much. But yeah, he's a great guitar hero. He's doing great stuff on these things. They have a falling out, but they do another good album in Dream Evil. The wheels kind of fall off of the bus, the lineup starts shifting, and they become somewhat of quite a bit of a smaller band. So the golden era where they're doing quite well, I think it's how does it work? I think they've got a platinum and a gold, and maybe another gold. I didn't
2 platinums, and the first 2 are platinums in the US, and then gold.
And gold. Okay, so that's great. Thank you for that. So So that's their golden period, but then they're kind of down on minor labels, and Rowan Robertson is in and Tracy G is in, and then they have other lineup changes, but they only put out 3 albums. Let's see, one, two, three. Yeah, 3 in the 90s and 3 in the 2000s, and that's all they do, because also along the way, Dio goes back with the Sabbath guys, and they do Dehumanizer in 92. And then later on, it's kind of all mixed up in reforming with Sabbath again and renaming the band Heaven and Hell. So when the wheels fall off, and Dream Evil is a great album. It's my favorite of the 80s, actually. It's a bit of a contrarian choice, and we've done a contrarians episode on that. But once that happens, once Vivian's gone and Craig comes in, their sales kind of go down, but that album should have done well, but they kind of never recover. He's never really that big a band again. So it's always interwoven with this whole Sabbath thing. You got Sabbath at the beginning, Sabbath in 92, Sabbath at the end, before unfortunately you lose Ronnie to death from stomach cancer. But yeah,
and in the middle, there's the grunge era too, right? So that impacted all the bands, all the metal bands, right?
Sure,
and Dio was one of the ones that got hit by this.
Yep, and they're on small labels, and there's some live albums along the way and stuff, and the touring is there, but it's again, it's mixed in. Essentially, his whole career is part Sabbath, part Dio.
Right on. All right, thanks for that. So let's get into the meat of it. So what we do with the albums by the decade is we ask our resident experts on the band to go through each decade and then name the best and the worst album of each decade, and then anything else that's interesting or important during each of the eras, and touch on the other albums if you wish. Mm-hmm. So we usually do this chronologically. So we'll start in the 80s, which is inarguably, as you pointed out, the golden era of the band. So yeah, you got 4 albums in quick succession here. There's Holy Diver in 83, Last in Line in 84, Sacred Heart in 85, and then Dream Evil in 1987. So you've already named Dream Evil, contrarian for sure, for most people, as your favorite. What is it about Dream Evil that makes it your favorite?
Yeah, so it would be my favorite just by a little bit. I mean, and second actually for me would be The Last in Line. On most people go with Holy Diver and then The Last in Line. And then actually a lot of people 50-50 will go Sacred Heart or Dream Evil. I've never understood this ignoring of Dream Evil. When I play that record, I mean, I just feel like it's full of great songs. It's pretty up tempo. The production's great. Craig does a great job. I mean, Craig, I guess, fits in the band as a little bit, it sounds like there's a little tension there, and he's working way too hard on his solos and all this sort of stuff. But essentially, the outcome is great. I think it's like Sunset Superman is a song a lot of people kind of forget, but I think it's probably his best song. But yeah, so that album, I think, feels literally like the same product mix as those first 2 albums. And then for worst of the decade, I definitely strongly would go with Sacred Heart. I always found the production's kind of screechy on it. The keyboards aren't dovetailed in too well. There's maybe a little bit too much of that. It's a little bit too poppy. I don't like the King of Rock and Roll at all. It reminds me of my same dislike of Long Live Rock and Roll back on the 3rd album Dio did with Rainbow. So definitely for me, and I think for most people, if they're deep fans and have really looked at it, I think Dream Evil would come in 3rd for most of those people, not at the bottom. I think most people would put Sacred Heart at the bottom. So yeah, I'll go Dream Evil first and Sacred Heart at the bottom, the other 2 in the middle. Cool.
Yeah, for me personally, the mid 80s, I switched from arena metal into the underground. Thrash was big, and hardcore punk and crossover and all that stuff. So I really lost track with Dio after The Last in Line. I do have Sacred Heart, but I just didn't, I moved away from that. So that's it's great to have you here to help us through all this. The one thing I was curious about is on these 2 albums here. You can see it here. You got the mascot. What did he call him? Murray.
Yeah.
And then he goes to the dragon mascot, Dean. Mm-hmm. And then on Dream Evil, he goes back to Murray and then drops him from there on in. Do you know what the history of that? Like, like Iron Maiden was smart with Eddie to, use him throughout all the time. Why did they drop this? Like, I thought that was a great mascot to have.
Yeah, good question. I've never really thought about it. I have a feeling it's just the idea of moving on and maybe thinking it's a little silly. It's probably better to move on, really. I mean, the mascot situation isn't particularly there as we go forward. There's still dragons and stuff and monsters. But honestly, I look at that and I don't think it's a very good mascot anyways. And I don't think it really took off. He lyrically gets better and moves on and does some other really cool things with lyrics. So I think it's just a case of Ronnie maturing.
And what was the cause of the friction with Vinnie Campbell that caused him to leave the fold?
Yeah, Vivian Campbell. Yeah. It's pretty clear cut. And oddly enough, there's been a lot of interviews lately where Vivian's talking about this and explaining the whole thing. And it really, I think, comes down to this idea that they had this meeting where they said they all got together, and Wendy, importantly, wasn't there. But they all got together, this drunken restaurant meeting or something. I think they were in the UK or something.
Never a good idea.
Yeah. And they basically, came to the agreement that after the third album, everything would be made equitable if the band is doing okay, kind of thing. And, so that means royalties and songwriting splits and all that kind of stuff. And I suppose the structure would be changed rather than just, direct pay you for whatever. And then it's Viv's contention that never happened. And I think everybody would agree, Ronnie's not here to talk about it, but I think Wendy would even agree that never happened. But, then it comes down to a dynamic of, is Ronnie sort of forceful enough to tell Wendy that this was the situation? Is there a little bit of convenience here that Wendy wasn't there and Wendy is kind of the boss and Wendy gets to decide? And and I've seen Wendy's and in the book, I've got both sides of the story. Wendy gets to say her piece. I don't know if she argues it all that well and really addresses the actual issue of how that happened. In Wendy's defense, I would say that probably I would say Viv's side of the story is 100% correct. But then Wendy, I think in her defense, if she wanted to kind of defend what went down more, I bet there's a lot of costs involved where there really wasn't as much money floating around as kind of these other guys might have thought there was. Sure. I have a feeling, when you mix that story with the same way of what went down in the Gillan band, I think you would find a little more similarities there, because the other guys in the Gillan band thought there was all this money and we should be doing better and we should be getting paid more. And in that situation, even more so, I think you realize there really wasn't that much money floating around. But yeah, it just sounds like maybe Wendy not being there and Ronnie not pushing the issue. And, it's a little bit of a grayscale, but it just sounds like this deal that they had did not come true. Right. And that's more or less it.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was reading your book, actually, I reread it just recently. I certainly got that impression that Campbell's side seemed to have more weight to it. But then it's sort of like piecing together the other side of the equation. Like, instead of just outright saying, Dio and the manager saying, hey, we put all the profits into the road show year after year, and we really weren't making that much because we owed the money to build the big stage show, and we weren't making any money. It didn't seem to be clearly stated by Dio or anybody on their side. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot from Wendy in the new book about that, and Viv's side of the story and Wendy's, but I kind of had one interview where it was sort of explained rather well. This was from an interview with a buddy of mine, Jimmy Kay, and I don't know if she argues it all that well. I think she still has to maybe I think if she got out there and told her story in a little more detail and explained it a little better, we might see a little more of both sides of the story. But like I say, Viv's out there been talking about a lot, even lately for some reason. So he's explained it a few times, and he's never really contradicted himself either. I think if you were a huge DIO researcher and expert and wanted to listen to Viv telling this story about 10 times, you'd really kind of understand his side of it.
Yeah. Okay. So anything else from the 80s that you want to touch on before we move to the 90s?
No, not particularly. Those are the there's 4 albums for the 80s, and I think we've got those ranked pretty good. It gets even simpler when we move to the 90s.
Right on. Yeah, so the 90s, as you said, there's 3 albums. There was 1990 Lock Up the Wolves, and then 91, 92 they left for DIO left for Black Sabbath, Dehumanizer. But then they're back at it in 93 with Strange Highways, and 96 was Angry Machines. So which of those 3 is your fave?
Well, I would go with Angry Machines by a little bit over Strange Highways. Strange Highways is pretty slow and doomy and dark. I mean, people have said it's kind of the heaviest DIO album. We just did a Contrarians episode, Dark Horse episode, all about Strange Highways. It was really cool. We went for like an hour or something with a bunch of panel members talking about that album. But I've always liked Angry Machines a little bit more. It feels a little more up-tempo and modern, not so just kind of trudgy. I'm not a big fan of slow DIO. And then Lock Up the Wolves. Yeah, so I'd have Angry Machines first, then in the middle, Strange Highways, and I'd put Lock Up the Wolves definitely the lowest. I find it to be the slowest and least exciting. I don't know if that's really the fault of Rowan Robertson. I don't think so. I would say it's Ronnie's predilection for really liking this kind of slow stuff. I'm not crazy about the production. It's kind of big and blocky. I think the production's really good on Strange Highways, and then maybe down a notch again on Angry Machines. But yeah, I just feel the firepower and the excitement of Angry Machines is a little bit more there in 96 than what you get in 93. But 93 feels a little bit more like a major label album. It actually feels the most major label out of all of them. Vinny Appice's drumming on there is just absolutely amazing. He's one of the best at playing slow. It's something he talks about. It's something Bill Ward talks about. But he does a really good job of playing slow on that album. But yeah, I think they do a good job on the next one. Tracy G as a guitarist gets a lot of stick for maybe being kind of like a noisy out there experimental guitarist and not so classical like Viv. So he wasn't that well accepted in the camp. Great guy, amazing guy. But I think his 2 albums are a little underrated. So yeah, Angry Machines top, Lock Up the Wolves bottom.
So let's talk a little bit about how they slowed down the material in the 90s and DIO's role in the writing. So I assume he did all the lyrics, but from a writing perspective, was he co-writing the music, or was he leaving the other various band members, because there's a bunch of changes through the 90s, to write it? Like, what's the music writing? How does that look? Who's involved?
Yeah, he's pretty involved in the music writing. He'll write it on a guitar. He'll sit there, like Wendy says, and like Ronnie used to say, he would sit and watch sports and write songs. So he would do lyrics, and I'm pretty sure he would write music as well. But he liked just the sort of, you don't have to put your mind into a game, and he'd sit there and watch sports and write stuff. But he was good enough on guitar such that he would come up with riffs, and he would be pretty heavy in the music end of things. But yeah, generally his guitarists would write a fair bit. Jimmy Bain, the bass player, who we also sadly lost recently to cancer, he was kind of considered a bit of a secret weapon in the band, a little bit of a John Paul Jones. He was known for writing some of the more commercial things and wanting to write some more commercial things. Vinny Appice wouldn't be involved in the writing at all, more or less, but he put his stamp on things. So yeah, he was in there. He was in there in the music. This is a band, it's named after him with the short version, just like a Van Halen, I suppose. But it's a band where he participated in all aspects of it, producing as well.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point I wanted to chat about, is that in the 80s, he produced all the albums. And then with 90, he teamed up with Tony Platt to produce. Then in '93, he stepped out of the producer role altogether and had Mike Fraser do the production. And then back in 1996, he returns as producer. So is that record label pressure to move him away from the producer's chair, or what's going on there?
Yeah, I don't think so. And both of those guys, Mike Fraser and Tony Platt, are known almost more as engineers. So they have they're a strong engineer producer type guy. So Ronnie is certainly still, he's probably producing those albums almost as much as if his name is on it as producer, because he's always had strong engineers. So he's always collaborating. I don't think he's a particular credit hog ever on songwriting even as well. He's not like in there voraciously saying, everything has to be said. It was written by me kind of thing. And yeah, producing's a little bit like that as well. So he's got strong opinions. He knows what he wants. And frankly, he never really thinking about, I'm just kind of looking over the list. I mean, I would say, even though I'm not crazy about some of these albums, and usually it's just about the slowness, I wouldn't say he has particular problems in production. Like I say, Sacred Heart is a little noisy. But all these 90s albums, they might be a little thick, blocky, but they still sound good. And even in the 2000s, I don't think he really has albums that don't sound good.
And what about the band movement? They had 3 keyboardists over 3 albums, 2 drummers, 2 guitarists. What's causing that change? And is that back to the money thing again, that people saying I should be making more? Or is it just a case of, musical differences? What was happening there?
Yeah, it could be a little bit of that. I think on the keyboardist end of things, you might have because also in this book there's a fair bit of Claude Schnell in there, and I think with Claude you get a little bit of the business side of it, but also the fact that a keyboardist is never going to be very happy in the Dio band because he doesn't really want a lot of keyboards. He's not a keyboard fan. It's almost like he's just finding a place to put them in, but he'd rather them just be out there in a live role and filling in on rhythm guitar, essentially on keyboards. So yeah, a keyboardist is never going to be creatively self-actualized in the Dio band. Another really interesting thing, a comment that I heard as an aside, more or less, from Doug Aldrich in the band that I thought was really interesting and probably overruns or overrides a lot of these troop movements within the band, is the idea that it's a super, super professional band, and Ronnie always wants everybody to practice a lot. So there's a lot of routining of the material. And he told me once that I thought it was a little revealing, is that we were always rehearsing, we were always practicing, and we were never really particularly getting paid for doing that side of it. So they were just always busy doing a lot of routining of everything, getting it really tight for the live show, an uncommon amount of rehearsals. And it's like, he said, how did he phrase it? This is a long time ago. And it's it's actually not in this book. It'd be in the next book, but he said, and it would be in the old book probably too, but he said, I was starting a family and I had a mortgage and all this stuff, and I'm just going in and playing all day, and we're not really getting paid for it. So it was a bit like that. It was a bit it's almost like, for the size of the band, too much demands was put on their time, possibly. But yeah, that would be an interesting thing to really probe, some of the other guys on, and see if they felt the same way.
That's like what I saw a documentary on Leonard Skinner, and all the band members were saying the same thing, that the lead singer who passed away, I forget his name, Von Zandt. He was basically the one who was whipping them into shape, and they would go in for 10 hours a day practicing, and there was a little bit of tension there between the bands, but he drove them crazy with the practicing. But I guess what comes out in the end, though, is a professional outfit, right? The more you practice, the better you are.
Yeah, the records in the live shows were top flight. So they were always, despite the record sales not being great really ever again, they were always a top shelf band.
Right on. Anything else from the 90s you wanted to touch on?
Not particularly. There were only the 3 albums, right? 1, 2, 3. Yeah. So yeah, no, that's good.
Okay, so let's get to the final era, the 2000s. So there's Magica in 2000, Killing the Dragon in '02, and then the final Dio album in '04 was Master of the Moon before Dio returned to Heaven and Hell. So again, what is your top album of the decade?
Yeah, so for the top, I would go with Killing the Dragon. And then in the middle, I would go with Master of the Moon. And then the least appreciated by me would be Magica 2000. So again, the theme here, couple of themes, but the main theme is I'm less a fan of slow Dio and more of a fan of up tempo, either fast OTT Dio or fast mid tempo Dio. I want to hear melodies. You know, I want to hear Last in Line, Holy Diver, and Dream Evil Dio. That's my favorite Dio, right? Yeah. So definitely Doug Aldrich on Killing the Dragon had that mandate as well. He was very explicit when I talked to him about that. Like he wanted a more up-tempo Dio. And I do love that album. I play that a lot, and I'd say that's my favorite from the 90s all the way forward. And that's why I would name the second book that. You know, the production's super clean and just kind of not super blocky on the snare drum or the bass drum. It's not overly bassy. It's certainly not an overly doomy album. It's just, it really sounds like those early days, even a little hair metal-y here and there with Push and things like that. And but the title track's amazing, just a great riff. So that one is definitely the gleaming machine of the 2000s. Magica I would put last because it's this is almost like one of those be careful what you wish for things. You know, everybody wanted a concept album out of Ronnie one day. And so he does it and everybody's like, this is too complicated. It's maybe a little cheesy. It's like, what's going on? It needs a whole essay to explain, plus the lyrics. And at the same time, it's kind of a little dour and slow and doomy, you know, mellow bits. And so I didn't really like it all that much. I just wanted some songs with hooks to emerge out of it, and there really isn't that much on that. And then Master of the Moon is kind of like musically and even production wise, it's a little close to Magica, but at least it's not a concept album. So I can find more to appreciate. So I'm going to put that one in the middle of all these. But again, just three, because, you know, essentially what happened is Heaven and Hell took over. The band Heaven and Hell took over. And with that, he gave us a full-length album, a live album. How does it work? So we got the full-length album, which is really long, I believe, and then 3 songs that came even before that were added on to the, you know, the thing. So you have 1.5 albums from those guys, plus the live thing. And then they reissued the early days live album. They did a lot of touring. So that kind of took over, and then we never got another Dio album because he dies of stomach cancer. So
yeah, you were mentioning in the book about that Dio was threatening to make Magica a trilogy.
Right.
So do you think he dropped it because the sales weren't good and he got some pushback, or he just ran out of time? Do you think he would have continued with the trilogy if he had the time?
I have a feeling he would have continued with it, but he did run out of time, and Heaven and Hell was a pretty, you know, it was a pretty high profile. You know, the album didn't do that great, but it was fairly well received. Again, it was slow, right? I mean, this is Sabbath and Dio were the same once you got up into this realm of things. When Ronnie was in the band, that album was slow and doomy, and Dehumanizer was slow and doomy. First 2 weren't like that really, but I think he just ran out of time. He probably would have done it. He always seemed to be pretty upbeat about the story. I don't think he particularly would have noticed or got because people loved Ronnie. I loved Ronnie. He was great. I don't think he got a lot of negativity about it at the time. But I could have seen him carry on with it. But yeah, I mean, he really was steadfastly in love with that slower Dio, and he used to say that it's easier to it's more fun and more creative and easier to sing and do vocals and lyrics over slow music than fast music. And I think that's why he liked it so much, being a vocalist and a lyricist. So he loved that kind of music, and like I say, I would have preferred it to be a little more up tempo.
Right on. So when you reflect back on the whole discography, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? What do you think of the Dio discography as a
I
whole?
think it's pretty cool. Like I say, I think they're all very professionally done. I think there's a lot of great songs on Sacred Heart as well, so I'm fine with that as well. Like I say, in the later period, I really like Killing the Dragon a lot. But one of the neat things about Ronnie is, and I've said this about Graham Bonnet too, but Ronnie's the clear case of this. Both of them, though. But this is me being contrarian because some of my Graham Bonnet views are not particularly mainstream. But let's just say both of them, I think, are two of the only guys who are on three of the greatest heavy metal albums of all time, with three different bands. And with Ronnie, that would be Rising, Holy Diver, because it probably more or less is considered the greatest one,
Yeah.
and Heaven and Hell, three different bands. And with Graham, it would be No Parole for Rock and Roll, Michael Schenker Assault Attack, and Rainbow Down to Earth. Yeah. But all three of Graham's are of a level lower than the three Ronnies, at least out there in the public realm. But I put them all pretty close. So I think that's pretty cool that those two guys have been on three of the greatest with three different bands.
Right on. Yeah, you don't see that very often, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So before we go, why don't you provide us with an update on what you're currently working on and what's going to be some upcoming releases coming from you, because you seem to always have some books coming out.
Yeah. So I've got the History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff audio podcast that I do by myself. That's just me talking. I'm up to 148 episodes of that. We've got the Contrarians YouTube channel with Marco and Nick. They do a great job of editing and putting together and planning everything. So we've got regular episodes and Dark Horse panel episodes with our fine Patreon subscribers. And then myself, I've got a really swanky, beautiful looking David Bowie book that's out in a couple of weeks. And the Damned book is in production. That's basically me reviewing every Damned song. I've got the visual biography series through Weimer. I've got stock at martinpopoff.com of the Blue Oyster Cult, Van Halen, Thin Lizzy, Nazareth, Hawkwind, the Yes, and now we've got Yes Part 2 coming out in a couple of weeks. So that's coming soon. And the Alice Cooper big visual book, which was soft cover, that's now going to be turned into a trade paperback and cracked into 2 books. So we're going to have one on the original band and then one where Alice goes solo. So I think that's pretty much everything that's coming up soon.
And where can they reach you to get the books?
martinpopoff.com. There's full descriptions. There's PayPal buttons for Canada, US, international. I sign them all, send them out from my office. That's my main source of income, is being a mail order guy of my own books.
Yeah, I hear you. So what was I going to say? I've lost track.
Okay.
Well, anything else you want to chat before we head?
I don't think so. I think we covered everything. That's pretty cool.
Right.
But yeah, thanks for having me on here. And just I think people should go back and reacquaint themselves with all these different Dio eras.
Well, I'm definitely going to be checking out the Killing the Dragon, because the classic era early albums I like. So that seemed to be the one that I'm going to be going back to revisit for sure. Yeah. So thank you for joining us, and everybody who's watching, listening. Thank you. And remember to check in at our website, www.themightydecibel.com. Have a great one.